Welcome, friends and fellow defenders of liberty, to Class 6 on our ongoing series, Blueprint for Liberty. Today, we'll pull back the curtain on one of the most critical yet least understood topics in the entire American experiment, constitutional money. Now, that phrase may sound like something from a law textbook, but I promise you, by the time we're done, you'll see that what we're talking about isn't some abstract theory. It's the very foundation of your freedom, your future, and your family's well-being. You see, every freedom you cherish, your right to speak, worship, bear arms, and be secure in your property, depends on one often overlooked pillar: sound money. And without it, that whole structure of liberty crumbles. So let's get into it, and let's rediscover what our founders knew: that debased money means debased freedom, and that a return to constitutional money is the first step on the road back to real liberty. Let me begin by asking you something. When's the last time you paid for something with a gold or silver coin? I don't mean a collector's item or a novelty. I mean real, honest, constitutional money. Chances are it's been a while and maybe never. But here's the thing, that used to be the norm in this country. And not just because gold and silver are shiny or rare, but because they are honest. Money is supposed to be a store of value. It's a measuring stick for exchange. But when government controls the money, when they print paper with no limit, no accountability, it controls everything. It can tax you through inflation, fund endless wars, and trap you in a system of debt that your children and grandchildren will never escape. That's not just bad economics, that's tyranny in slow motion. That's why money matters. It's not just about math, it's about morality. It's about liberty. When the delegates gathered in Philadelphia in 1787, they didn't do so because everything was going great. No, they met because the country was falling apart, economically, politically, and constitutionally. Debt was crushing. Inflation was rampant. The continental dollar, our wartime currency, was so worthless that it gave birth to a phrase you've heard your whole life: not worth a continental. States were imposing trade restrictions on each other, almost coming to blows. Foreign powers looked on with smug certainty that the American experiment was doomed to fail. Why? Because the Articles of Confederation had left the national government with responsibilities, but no power, particularly no power to enforce honest taxation or currency standards. So what did Congress do? It cranked up the printing press. The founders watched as the people were punished by paper money, and they swore never again. And that's what leads us to the monetary mandates they embedded in the Constitution itself. The Articles of Confederation were a brave start, no doubt about that. They were born in the crucible of revolution and drafted by men who feared centralized power. But noble intentions don't always produce functional systems. Under the Articles, Congress had responsibilities. It could make treaties, declare war, and manage foreign relations. But it didn't have the power to raise revenue to support those responsibilities. It had to beg the states for money. And when the states refused, Congress had no recourse. So what did Congress do? It turned to the printing press, creating wave after wave of unbacked paper money. This wasn't just bad policy, it was betrayal. It undermined trust, destroyed savings, and plunged the people into a financial pit from which they could not escape. That economic crisis led to a political crisis. Farmers rebelled, states argued, foreign debt went unpaid, and it became painfully clear: if America was to survive, we needed a government that could restrain, not expand, the power to manipulate money. So in 1787, the framers met in Philadelphia with one goal: to preserve the Union and with it, liberty. And one of the very first issues they tackled? Money. They knew that liberty cannot endure in a land where money is manipulated. So they drafted a constitution that left no ambiguity. Article 1, Section 10, flatly declares that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Why? Because gold and silver can't be printed. They can't be created at will by a Congress in the pocket of central bankers or under the thumb of foreign creditors. Gold and silver are honest. They're immune to inflation and indifferent to political ambition. They force governments to live within their means, and that's exactly what the founders intended. Let's zero in on that clause in Article 1, Section 10. It says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. That's not vague. That's not metaphorical. That's not open to interpretation. That is a direct, unequivocal, and binding prohibition against fiat currency. The founders weren't saying states shouldn't print paper money. They were saying they couldn't, period. They'd seen the horrors of worthless paper money with their own eyes. They'd lived through hyperinflation. They had watched entire communities fall into poverty. And they understood that once a government has the power to create money out of nothing, it will never stop until it has turned that power against the people who trusted it. The founders weren't guessing. They weren't experimenting. They had lived through the catastrophe of fiat currency, and they wanted no part of it going forward. Thomas Jefferson said it plainly, paper is poverty, that it is only the ghost of money and not money itself. That wasn't hyperbole. That was the voice of a man who saw the consequences of turning government into a printing press. In the Federalist number 44, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, echoed the warning. The loss which America has sustained since the peace from the pestilent effects of paper money constitutes an enormous debt against the states. The founders wrote into the Constitution not just guidelines, but prohibitions. They didn't want future generations, us, to fall into the same trap of trusting politicians to create value out of nothing, because that's not currency. That's counterfeiting cloaked in official authority. So what happened? If the Constitution was so clear, how did we get to the point where the dollar is backed by nothing but government promises? The answer, my friends, is slow, steady corruption. It started with Alexander Hamilton and the first bank of the United States, a central bank that immediately began to chip away at the hard money foundation. Then came the second bank, then the greenbacks of the Civil War. Then in 1913, the crown jewel of corruption, the Federal Reserve. The Fed was sold to the American people as a stabilizer, a protector, but in truth, it's a legalized cartel of private banks backed by federal power, given authority to issue paper money and manipulate interest rates. Since the Fed's creation, the value of the dollar has plummeted over 97%. That's not a policy flaw. That's the result of abandoning the Constitution. Gold and silver were abandoned not because they failed, but because they succeeded in limiting the size and spending of government. And government does not like limits. Let's put it plainly. The US dollar today is a shadow of its former self. It's not money. It's a government instrument of control. What used to be redeemable in gold is now redeemable in nothing but inflation and debt. In 1913, you could buy a nice suit for less than $20 in gold. That same gold coin, if you could find it, still buys a nice suit today. But that $20 bill won't even buy you a tie. Why? Because fiat money always fails. Always. And when it fails, it takes liberty down with it. When your savings are destroyed by inflation, when your wages are eaten up by government manipulation, when your children inherit debt instead of dollars, then you know the system has become a weapon, not a blessing. That's where we are today, a dollar in name only, and a government that treats money as magic instead of moral responsibility. Now let's get down to brass tacks. What does the Constitution actually authorize when it comes to money? Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin. Notice the word coin. That's not a printing term, that's a minting term. The founders deliberately used the word coin to mean gold and silver, real, tangible, constitutional money, not banknotes, not credit, not fiat currency backed by nothing but a politician's promises. And why did they do that? Because coining money has a natural limit. You can't just conjure gold out of thin air. But paper is temptation. Paper is power. Paper is the road to ruin, and the founders knew it. They also gave Congress the authority to regulate the value thereof, not manipulate it, not redefine it, but regulate it, to keep it honest, to make sure that a dollar was a dollar, whether you were in Boston or Savannah. That's not how it works anymore. The Constitution's monetary clauses have been trampled underfoot by generations of central planners and political cowards who traded your liberty for their leverage. Sound money is not just a good idea. It's a shield, a defense against tyranny, corruption, and central control. When your money is honest, your government must be honest. When your currency is anchored in gold or silver, the state can't inflate its way into war, welfare, and waste. History proves the point. Rome debased its coinage as it descended into dictatorship. Germany printed itself into Nazism. Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Argentina, every fiat money regime ends the same way, with poverty, power grabs, and the destruction of civil society. Sound money doesn't just protect wealth, it protects freedom. It binds the hands of politicians. It reminds bureaucrats that their ambitions have limits. And it tells the people this is your money, not theirs. The founders knew that no paper promise could ever take the place of hard, metallic reality. And if we ever hope to be a free people again, we must rediscover that ancient and American truth. What does fiat money enable? Everything liberty despises. It funds undeclared wars. It pays for unconstitutional programs. It props up bloated bureaucracies. It allows the government to create money out of thin air and spend it before you even know it's been stolen from your wallet. Fiat money is a silent thief. It doesn't kick in your door, doesn't show up in a ski mask. It just quietly eats away at your paycheck, your savings, your future. Every time they print another $1 trillion, your dollar buys less. Every time the Fed inflates the currency, your labor is devalued. That's not an economic policy. That's a transfer of power from you to them. If the government had to pay for its programs with gold and silver, you'd see a lot fewer wars, a lot fewer handouts, and a lot more honesty. Fiat money is the fuel of tyranny, and every time we accept it, we help fan the flame. Now here's the good news, and it's good news grounded in the Constitution. The states can fight back. In fact, some already are. Utah passed a law in 2011 recognizing gold and silver coins issued by the U.S. Mint as legal tender. Other states, including Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Wyoming, and Missouri, are following suit. And this isn't just symbolic. It's substantive. It's a constitutional check on an unconstitutional regime. This is nullification in action. Not the kind the media mocks or the politicians fear, but the kind that's rooted in the very soil of our founding principles. When states say, we will not accept worthless paper as payment, we will not be slaves to a counterfeit currency, they are doing exactly what the founders expected, standing between the people and federal overreach. If we are to reclaim our monetary sovereignty, it will begin at the state level with laws that restore gold and silver as money, as the Constitution requires. Now it's time, my friends, to talk about taxes. But not just talk about taxes. Let's talk about how they're supposed to be, constitutionally defined and collected, and how far we've strayed from that blueprint. First, the Constitution is crystal clear on the power of taxation. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 grants Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, but with a critical condition. Taxes must be uniform throughout the United States. That means no special carve-outs, no targeted punishments, and no exceptions favoring one group over another. The framers were determined to avoid the kinds of tax abuses that had provoked the revolution itself: targeted taxes, discriminatory levies, and tax policies that crushed liberty rather than preserve it. They knew taxation was a tool of tyranny in the wrong hands. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, warned, "The apportionment of taxes on the various descriptions of property is an act which seems to require the most exact impartiality. Yet there is, perhaps, no legislative act in which greater opportunity and temptation are given to a predominant party to trample on the rules of justice." Second, the Constitution distinguishes between direct and indirect taxes. Direct taxes, like capitation or property taxes, had to be apportioned among the states according to population. Indirect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises had to be uniform. This system was designed to keep the federal government within its proper bounds. Direct taxes could only be levied fairly, with every state paying its share based on representation. And indirect taxes, tariffs, and excises would be evenly applied, ensuring no group or region bore a heavier burden than another. But now let's talk about what went wrong and why the Revenue Act of 1934 stands out as an especially unconstitutional piece of this mess. The Revenue Act of 1934, passed during the New Deal frenzy, drastically expanded the federal income tax system, which itself only existed thanks to the 16th Amendment, an amendment that overturned the original constitutional safeguards on direct taxation. This act didn't just increase rates. It introduced new categories of income subject to tax, added so-called normal tax brackets on top of already steep surtaxes, and made the tax code even more progressive, targeting higher earners with confiscatory rates. Imagine this. The top marginal income tax rate was jacked up to 63%, while new taxes were placed on corporate earnings and capital gains, all under the pretext of economic recovery. It gave bureaucrats at the Treasury Department sweeping new powers to define income, to enforce collections, and to pursue penalties for noncompliance, creating an entire army of tax agents whose authority, in many cases, rivaled that of the courts. This act, like much of the New Deal, violated the principle of uniformity and targeted different groups with different rates, directly contradicting the constitutional requirement that taxes be uniform. Worse, it expanded the federal government's reach deep into the lives of ordinary Americans, entangling them in complex regulations, forms, and penalties, all contrary to the Constitution's design for a limited government funded by fair and transparent taxes. Thomas Jefferson put it plainly, that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. That's precisely what the progressive income tax under the Revenue Act of 1934 did, using taxes as a weapon to punish some and reward others. In short, the Revenue Act of 1934 was an assault on the founders' blueprint for liberty, a blueprint that demanded simplicity, fairness, and above all, limits on government power. So let's remember, taxation is supposed to be constitutional. Direct taxes apportioned by population, indirect taxes uniform, and always designed to secure liberty, not subvert it. The New Deal's Revenue Act of 1934 threw that blueprint into the shredder, laying the groundwork for the bloated, intrusive IRS bureaucracy we endure today. It's time we reclaim the wisdom of the founders and remind our fellow Americans that even taxes must be shackled by the chains of the Constitution. Finally, my friends, I want to open your eyes to a hard truth. Our economy, the lifeblood of American prosperity, is now 2/3 Marxist. And the worst part, most Americans don't even realize it. First, remember what we already discussed about money, constitutional money. The Founding Fathers were crystal clear. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. That means gold and silver, real money, chosen by the people, not printed by bureaucrats. But what do we have today? A Federal Reserve, a central bank, that prints fiat currency out of thin air, manipulates interest rates, and bails out cronies on Wall Street. Where did this idea come from? Karl Marx himself. In his Communist Manifesto, Marx called for the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with an exclusive monopoly. That's exactly what the Federal Reserve does. Second, let's look at the taxes that feed this monstrous system. The founders gave us a system of taxation that was simple, fair, and constitutional. Direct taxes apportioned among the states and indirect taxes uniform across the nation. But since the passage of the 16th Amendment and the progressive income tax, an act that was completely unconstitutional and anathema to everything our revolutionary ancestors fought for, the IRS now bleeds us dry with a tax system that punishes success and rewards dependency. Again, straight from Marx's playbook. The second plank of the Communist Manifesto, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. And today, the more you earn, the more the government takes. That's Marxism, not constitutional government. So, what's left that's still free? Patriots, the only sector of our economy that remains anything close to free is manufacturing, where men and women still work, build, and compete in a market that, while burdened by regulations, is not fully under the thumb of Marxist control. But even that is under threat, and the danger of bureaucratic burden crushing our economy is clear and present. Regulations, subsidies, and globalist trade deals are eroding what's left of our free enterprise system, the last bastion of economic liberty. Would you believe that the Code of Federal Regulations, the list of all federal regulations currently in force, consists of approximately 190,260 pages across 245 volumes? The Roman historian Tacitus told us something about countries with that many laws and regulations. The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws. What does that say about our beloved country? It says that positions of power are filled by cronies, corruption, and communists. Put simply, our economic system is now 1/3 manufacturing, relatively free market, 1/3 controlled by a Marxist central bank, the Federal Reserve, 1/3 funded by a Marxist progressive income tax, 2/3 Marxist, 1/3 free. That's the grim and undeniable reality of today's American economy. My friends, this is not what the Constitution envisioned. The founders wanted sound money, constitutional taxation, and economic liberty, not a Marxist system where central planners pull the strings and hardworking Americans get fleeced and then led like lambs to socialist slaughterhouses. If we want to restore liberty, we must end the Federal Reserve, abolish the progressive income tax, and return to constitutional money. Only then can we reclaim the economic freedom that built this nation and made us the envy of the world. Let's rise up and finish the work the founders started to defend the Constitution, restore sound money, and break the chains of Marxist tyranny that hold us back. This battle isn't just for legislators and lawyers, it's for you and me. And here's how we can win it. First, educate. Talk to your family, your neighbors, your state reps about what constitutional money really means. Share the words of Jefferson and Madison. Show them the economic truth. Second, agitate. Politely but persistently demand that your state take up sound money legislation. Show up. Speak up. Don't let this issue die in committee. Third, nullify. Push your state to pass laws that recognize gold and silver as tender. Support honest commerce. Opt out, whenever and wherever you can, from the fiat system. And finally, reform. Get involved in local politics. Encourage your state treasurer, your governor, and your legislators to do what's right, not what's easy. Liberty isn't defended with slogans. It's defended with action. And that action starts now, and it starts with you. So let me leave you with this, my friends. The founders gave us a blueprint for liberty, and they knew that without sound money, that blueprint would be torn to shreds. They didn't fight a revolution so we could trade kings for central bankers. They didn't spend 8 years placing their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor on the altar of liberty so that the people could be taxed to levels King George never would have dreamed of imposing. They didn't establish a republic just to watch Marxist regulations and socialist schemes shackle the people with unimaginable debt. They didn't freeze nearly to death at Valley Forge so that our elected officials could perpetually tax and spend the people into poverty and slavery. They didn't write a constitution so we could ignore its plain words. They didn't risk their lives and fortunes so we could live under a paper regime controlled by unelected bureaucrats. This is our moment to push back, to reclaim what has been stolen from us silently, deceitfully, and steadily. Let us be the generation that says no more. No more printing lies. No more paper chains. No more pretending that a fiat dollar is anything more than a tool of tyranny. No more central bankers manipulating our money. No more Marxism. Let us be the generation that returns this country back into a republic, a real republic. Because without our immediate intervention, soon our liberty and the Constitution that protects it will be thrown onto the scrap heap of history. Don't miss the next Blueprint for Liberty lesson as we discuss tariffs and trade as defined and delegated by the Founding Fathers in the Constitution. Until then, my friends, God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.